Good afternoon, everybody. Good to have all of you here. Excited to get going and thank you for joining us for part 2 of the webinar, Maximize Sales Effectiveness with Sales Team Science, Objections, Negotiations, and Closings. Oh my. You might remember I'm Chip St. Clair, Vice President of Marketing for Tyson Group, and I'll be moderating the webinar today. We're going to have a few housekeeping items before we get rolling though. First, all registrants will receive a recording of this webinar within the next few days. And secondly, we're keeping this webinar short and sweet at 45 minutes, and we're going to reserve the last 10 minutes or so for Q&A. So please put any questions you have into the Q&A section. I'll be sure to field them for Lance. And for the sales leaders attending this webinar, we will invest in your team by providing access to one sales team member to a comprehensive assessment that provides predictive insights into their competencies and negotiations and objections. So please reach out to me via email to take advantage of this special offer following the webinar. So for those unfamiliar with Tyson Group, we are an award-winning sales training and consulting firm that empowers clients to drive sales performance through strategy, leadership solutions, and skill development. And we service some of the biggest brands in the world. We are data-driven and obsessed with results. And although we don't always do it for the awards, they never hurt. If I could humble brag for a moment, I'm proud to say we're recently named a 2 times Inc. 5000 winner for being one of the fastest growing companies in America. So on to the reason we're here today. In the fast-paced world of sales, navigating complexities of objections, negotiations, and closings can often feel like wandering through a labyrinth. Well, part 2 of this webinar is designed to equip sales leaders, managers, and C-suite executives with the tools to confidently handle every stage of the sales process, from unpacking the art of listening, understanding, and responding to objections in a way that turns doubts into opportunities, to deconstructing the psychology of negotiation to empower your team to navigate even through the toughest negotiations with ease. So to help us on our journey, to unpack the sales leader journey is best-selling author, Forbes, Inc. and Fast Company contributor, President and CEO of Tyson Group, Lance Tyson.
Hey, Chip, thank you, buddy. I appreciate it. And welcome, everybody. My style is pretty conversational. So as we go through this today, kind of think of questions you may have. I mean, I'm walking you through what would be pretty comprehensive training that we go through in consulting with our clients. So a lot of people are here today, whether you're a sales leader or you're an individual contributor. You're probably looking to increase sales productivity. We hear from leaders all the time, the top 3 things that they're looking for is sales productivity. But that productivity only goes up through reducing the amount of time it actually takes to make a sale, and then gaining higher closing rates. And there seems to be a lot of friction between the words objection and negotiation. So let's dive in a little bit, right? So as we look at being more effective, right, we got to look at navigation. Like, how do we work our way through the sales process? We got to understand that inside the sales process, prior to even getting an objection or starting the negotiation, right? Or if we're trying to renew an account or something like that, there is a difference between buying signals and warning signals. And then what are buying objections? How do we resolve them? And if you're taking notes, it's a resolution of objections. You don't handle objections, you don't deal with objections, you don't battle with objections. And then negotiation. Now, a couple things to think about and review. If you were here with us last time, right? There are at the top layer, there are what we call marketplace objections. Things like cost, that could be negotiable or an objection. The value your product or service are bringing to the table. Price tag, and budget. All 4 of these things are different. However, a lot of times your clients and prospects use these words interchangeably. What's cost? Cost is because you have something. So if you actually bought a car, the cost of having a car is tires and oil and insurance. Otherwise, you wouldn't need those things if you didn't have a car. Value is perceived, right? Like, it's in the eyes of the beholder. So value is probably one of the things that is most undescribable. Price is the price. The marketplace has an uncanny way of getting rid of products and services that don't don't have value or the price won't hold. And then budget's a decision-making process. It's usually internal. A lot of those are marketplace-driven objections, and there's many more that are indicative to all kinds of businesses. We do business with a very large HVAC distributor nationwide. And they have a different set of objections in their marketplace. We have organizations that do complex media deals. They have a different set of objections that are indicative to their business. But there's also another layer of objections, which we call inherent objections. And they're because of the sales process, right? Because of how we've gained momentum in the sales process. So for instance, there's like 5 or 6 of them. I put 4 up here. Preoccupation, right? We haven't successfully, if you go all the way to the right, we haven't successfully gotten somebody's attention. Disinterest, maybe because we're not asking questions or interesting enough or thoughtful enough questions that bear down on potential want or need. Disengagement, right? Because we don't have enough glue in our sales process. Or procrastination. Typically we pitch something, most people say I need to think about it, or we need to talk about it. If we go to another level, just some review and some things my job is to disrupt you and get you all thinking a little bit differently today and saying, look, how can I reduce sales cycle time? How can we close more deals? Whether, like I said earlier, you're an individual contributor or a leader, how do you design those sales processes? Now, just a reminder, in all things that we do in Tyson Group, one of our core philosophies is we don't like to throw the word relationship around too much, because relationships typically an outcome. What we coach and consult and train on is we want our clients to have a clear understanding of the market, a clear understanding of their client or prospect. We believe there has to be a level of rapport. And rapport is not relationship. Rapport is a connectivity with people. It's a likability, right? It ebbs and flows, but we know rapport allows us to influence. And that's different than persuasion. And credibility yields trust in persuasion. And persuasion is indicative to clear understanding by argument or process, right? So this is foundationally what we need to build our house to ultimately become better negotiators, to operate our predictable, scalable sales process and negotiation process. And I did mention that both are process oriented. If we move to the next step, right? You got to look at a gap right now. And I think I'm going to use this as 2 examples. If you're looking at yourself right now and you're saying that, what is my team's current situation with how they negotiate and deal with objections? If you're here personally, right? Where are you? What's your current situation? What's your desired situation, right? And we got to close that gap. But I would also say this is also indicative or a metaphor for this really leads any sale off. I mean, if you're selling anything, whether you're selling software or you're selling a comprehensive IT solution, most of your selling happens inside that gap. Every one of your clients has a current desired situation. So if I invoke a thought process today, if anything, I really want you to kind of look at your current process and see what's my current desired, where do I need to go, where am I, where I need to go, but also as you're negotiating, dealing with objections. So I hope this anchors in a little bit as we move this forward today. So now, just to get you thinking a little bit, depending on who you sell to, we have multiple different verticals that we do business in, from I mentioned before, to distribution, to media, sports and entertainment, right? We do some business in ag and manufacturing. What kind of buyer do you actually sell to? Who are those influences? Because a lot of what we're going to coach you on is you in thinking about who you have to resolve an objection through or negotiate with you. Are you dealing with a financial buyer? Are you dealing with more of a user buyer, somebody who actually is hands-on with the product or service, right? Are you dealing with an executive buyer? Or are you buying with a technical buyer, somebody who has a certain subject matter expertise? Now, there's 2 ways to think about this too. And as you negotiate and start to plan and prep for your negotiation or objections and presentations, right? The the thought process here also is this can be a title of a person, but somebody can actually have attributes of all these also. You could be like let's go to executive buyer. You can be an executive buyer, but your position wouldn't indicate that you were a high level executive, but you like more of an overarching understanding of things where you would like top line information. So there's also attributes to that too. So as you think about it, kind of mark those things down. Who do you in your process? Who are you selling to? Who are you presenting to? Who are you resolving objections through and ultimately negotiating? And then on the flip side, there are some complex sales process here that you have a decision maker you're dealing with in the sales process. There's also a shadow org chart that you got to sell to. Or some of us, like one of my salespeople last week, John and I were in Muskegon, Michigan, and we were selling to a buying group of 5 folks that were operation oriented, sales oriented, and executive oriented. So as you prep, think through this a little bit. Now let's kind of map some things out. Now I'm not saying this is the only sales funnel that's out there, or sales process that's out there, but if you start to think about it a little bit, because some of the questions that we got last time is, okay, where Lance do we negotiate? Where do we deal with objections? So if you looked at this in a very linear fashion, you said, look, no matter what you sell, there's probably some initial communication and prospecting to get a lead. Sometimes they're inbound, sometimes we have business development people that get us those leads. Sometimes marketing does, depending where the funnel starts. But the salesperson starts some level of initial communication, even if you are on a client success team, right? You're going to have some initial communication to cross-sell, upsell, or renewal. There's probably some level of a very broad word of a needs analysis or an opportunity analysis. We then, as salespeople and as businesses, we develop a solution. We either develop in our head, we develop it in a presentation, we go back and redesign. That presentation is delivered, sent, or presented. Now, why do we get some objections and why are certain things negotiable? It's usually because in solution development and solution presentation, we did not use the right evidence. I didn't say enough evidence. I said the right evidence to remove doubt. I don't know if any of you are watching the show on Apple TV called Presumed Innocent. I think Jake Gyllenhaal's in that. By the way, that was also a movie in 1990 that Harrison Ford was in. But it's all about a DA who's accused of a heinous crime, and they have to present the right evidence to get themselves out of the situation. So as you watch that, or you watch anything your salespeople do, does evidence remove doubt or does it increase doubt? Because that's where the persuasion goes. And right, you need to use the right amount of evidence to convince the buyer, right, that they're justified in making a decision. That's kind of the rule there. So then at some level, the buying group, buyer, right, is going to be affected by how we actually deliver. We have a lot of clients that get sucked into it, for instance, sending proposals and sending information. Well, I would tell you as a high performance sales coach that sending is certainly not selling. And sometimes, most of the time, our job, whether we're in a client success team or a salesperson, our job is actually to present information, not send it. And sometimes we got to create that argument, but they're going to evaluate, and we got to understand what they're evaluating and how they're going to make the decision. And that usually formulates a layer of objections. So we got to decide when, where, and how we resolve those objections. And then once those objections are identified and or resolved, there's going to be an output. And that output is what becomes negotiable at that point. We're going to go deeper in that today. And then we close. So we either close through negotiation or close through objections. But that's kind of the track we're going in. And a lot of salespeople actually need to see this sequence. And then all of us need to understand what that time frame is in between things. So as we move the needle, right, if we're resolving objections, a lot of times we got to get our buyers to define, defend, and explain. And we got to get them to state an objection so we know what we're dealing with, or multiple objections. 9 times out of 10, it is multiple objections. Then our job as sales leaders and salespeople is to decide when we get objections to actually read the prospect and categorize a little bit. We got to decide based off our experience, based off our qualifiers. Is that objection a put off? Are they sincere? Then we got to decide, is it genuine? And you might say, well, Lance, how do I do that? Well, that's really based on your industry. That's based off different qualifiers. That's based off, do you have momentum? Do you need artificial momentum? You're going to decide is what they saw and what you presented, or did they have a misconception about what was presented? The right solution to the wrong problem sometimes is worse than the wrong problem to the right solution. So we got to get I think I said that wrong. Excuse me. I'll say that one more time. The right solution to the wrong problem is worse than the wrong solution to the right problem. And sometimes that if we don't get the problem defined right, there's a misconception. Are they biased to a certain way to do things? Meaning they don't want to deal with change. Is the information they're giving us half baked? Then there's a lot of categories of objections, but we got to make some decisions here. And a lot of times when our trainers and coaches are working through salespeople, most salespeople can communicate what they assume the objection is. We would estimate less than 30% of the salespeople that we're dealing with and our clients actually get a stated objection. And that is part of the problem with categorizing. So we got to kind of think through that. And then that brings us now to a jump off point of really back to the sales funnel, jumping into the negotiation. So I'm gonna actually stop it there, and I just kind of want you to think for a second. What's going to really drive our success here? So I'm gonna jump into some more in depth about negotiating. So now, excuse me one second. Let me get to the top of this slideshow. All right. So I'm hoping, just pull this other one down. Excuse me, a little technical difficulty here. All right. So let's get into negotiation. All right. So as we're looking at negotiation, there is some pillars, like when you actually get into the negotiation process. The pillars though to think about and what to rank yourself against are four things, right? What we would call, and we evaluate, and Chip mentioned earlier, we would look at different aspects of one of your salespeople to see where they are. One of the things we want to see is EQ, and that EQ is how does a person make decisions under stress or pressure? How do they read the audience? What are their people skill like, right? How are they seeing that? That's an emotional quotient. Two, do you have a predictable and scalable process to negotiate? Most organizations we deal with, they're more apt to say, hey, good negotiator does X, Y, and Z. What's the presentation look like? And typically people who are good negotiators have a high level of organizational skills, because you got to kind of remember where you are in the process. Now let's dive a little deeper. My favorite quote, and I really want you to read this because it's important back to that EQ piece. It's by Will Durant, and he said, continue to express your dissent, your needs, but remain civilized, for you'll sorely miss civilization if it's sacrificed in the turbulence of change. And I was with a group last week, Monumental Sports and Entertainment down in Washington, and boy, we did a whole day on negotiating. We were actually working through very specific deals with our client. And everybody kept saying, we got to dissent, because at some point we're going to disagree. And so when we negotiate, we got to remember those things are pretty important. Now, let's look at negotiation, right? When selling an idea, you got to keep asking yourself, what's the difference between resolving an objection and negotiating? Okay. So go back to that funnel and you got to decide where you are, right? Because think about it this way, a lot of clients we deal with, and we're just working with a group, a manufacturing group, and immediately the buyer in the situation we're talking to, the buyer threw up their hands with price and they started to complain about its price. And since the salesperson didn't know whether that was an objection or not, decided that they would really just attack price, and they went into bargaining right away, which we'll talk to you in a minute. Bargaining is a part of the negotiation process. And the problem is it's hard to bargain if you're blind. And where the salesperson was blind is they didn't actually clarify what that person meant price. Was it budget? Was it terms? Was it a competitive offer? Since they didn't do that at all. And then in an ideal world, a good salesperson would say, well, look, in addition to price, what else? And the person would say something or nothing. So then as a salesperson, I would say, well, look, I'm not sure we can do anything with price at all. I'm curious, what number would you put on it? Or in addition to that, or if we resolved the price objection, showed a lot of value, would you move forward? So it wasn't even isolated. So that salesperson attacked price and started to give it ground. And remember, if you give something up and the buyer doesn't give something up, that's actually extortion, right? So I think at some level, right, you need to know where you are in the process, and you got to be coaching your salespeople to make sure they understand. Most people, salespeople, and the tougher conversation that we can see in every assessment and survey that we do is people struggle with price. And remember something else. Most sellers or negotiators buy and sell, or they sell and negotiate how they buy it. So if you have a seller that actually is more sensitive to price or shops for a bargain, they're more likely to give ground there, right? So think about if you did sell cars, most of us, when we do go buy a car, the salesperson never deals with financing. The finance manager does, because salesperson will typically give it away. That's a process thing, right? Salesperson give a little up here, a little up there. So you got to make sure the person who does some of that stuff isn't the person who's going to win, be at the biggest odds of winning. So what I like to go to is definitions, right? Somebody told me one time, I heard a speaker say, negotiation, excuse me, go back a slide. Negotiation is a lot like the word pornography. Now, before you get offended, understand what I'm saying. According to the US government versus Larry Flint, in a famous Supreme Court case, pornography is in the eyes of the beholder. Some people may look at the statue of David, Michelangelo's David, as hardcore pornography. Some wouldn't. And I don't mean to offend you, but the word negotiation is not clear in business. Most people know what the skill sets of a good negotiator. Most people know what a good negotiator looks like or acts, how they act. Most of you would know very common rules like don't go first, be careful what you put in writing. You also hear cliches like the first person that talks loses. Most people know that, but they've really not really sat down and defined the word negotiate, right? So if it was a verb used without an object, it would be to deal or bargain with another or others in preparation or preliminaries of a business deal or contract or business deal. Okay, fair enough. Second is to arrange or bring about a discussion on settlement terms, negotiate alone, right? So typically it comes after you're settling terms. So you've already agreed on the loan. So now let's look at terms. Is it going to be a 5-year loan? Is it going to be a 10-year loan? What's the interest rate? Is that negotiable, right? To manage transaction conduct. All right. So to conduct or facilitate, that makes sense. Okay. Skip over 4 for a second. To transfer draft a promissory note to a new owner, endorsement in delivery or by delivery. I actually think you should be looking at number 4 as we talk through all this. Sales to negotiation. You should think about how to move through, around, and over in a satisfactory manner. To negotiate a good dance step without tripping. To negotiate a treaty, right? Negotiate, move. Now, think about this. This is what is the goal of a successful negotiation, right? So if you go down to the bottom triangle, a very negative experience and very low gain, okay? If you go to the top, very positive experience and high gain. Most people would say they want some kind of a win-win. So if we looked at this as a journey, right, kind of up at the mountain, right, bottom, low, left, harsh conditions, base camp, right? As you move up into the mid-range of qualitative, right, positive experience, that's qualitative, quantitative, a mid-range, we're getting on an easier trail. As you get higher up, right, positive experience, high gain, we start to get into a steep climb. But then as we get to the very top of this positive experience, very high gain, we're at the top, or we're at the summit. So this is where you start getting like, okay, we need to really understand our client. We got to understand what's a win for our business, what's a win for them. So how do we accomplish this X and Y axis? So a couple things to think about. I'm gonna go over some very, very minor tactics to think about, and then we'll get a little bit into the process. So as you start to get into terms, next steps, how something's going to start, and you start to negotiate those things, whatever it is in your business, positioning becomes an important part, because now we're going to go into some spots we disagree. So how do we put a positive spin on it for ourselves with our own EQ and how we operate? Two, proposing possible solutions, right? So we obviously may agree in principle to something, but now what are the possible pathways, like kind of going up that mountain? What are the possible solutions? And then where you're going to compromise, right? Giving and taking. A great book out there by Chris Voss, Never Split the Difference. I was on a podcast with Chris. I was actually on that app called Clubhouse, and Chris and I were trying to convince like this famous writer on whether to do a reality TV show. So Chris and I are going back and forth, and we got an interesting conversation. His book, Never Split the Difference, why he is a competitor. It's really hard to do. I've seen very few cases where, yeah, if you're in a hostage situation, you don't want to split the difference. But I think most businesses like mine or yours, one party sees the value at some level, we see it at something else, and there's probably some give and takes, whether it's splitting the difference or compromising something, right? So as we look deeper into this, right? Okay, let's think about our people skills or our EQ. One of the books I recommend. I was part of the Dale Carnegie organization one time. Is when you're negotiation, remember some key EQ or human relation principles. Begin in a friendly way as opposed to not. Listen intently, right? Listen to understand, not listen to respond. Let the other save face if you can. Telling somebody they're wrong and demonstrating they're wrong is usually not a win. That's a very transactional or very small win. It doesn't go very far. My favorite one is try to see things from the other person's point of view. It's much easier for somebody to describe what they see as opposed to how they feel. Avoid arguments. The only way to win an argument is to avoid it. Ask open-ended questions. Be genuinely interested in other people, and people know the difference. Show respect for the other person. It's easy to say they're wrong. Maybe tell them you understand. Okay. So that's some tactic things, and you think about anything, because it's not about a fight. Some guidelines, right? You don't have to be aggressive to be a good negotiator. I think you interchange that word. It's okay to be assertive because you can shut that on and off. Negotiation is not about fighting. It's about maneuvering, like we talked about. It's about knowing where you are in the process. Most people actually have a pretty natural talent for negotiating. You might think you don't, but you do. Think about all the things you've bartered in your life. Think of all the times you've negotiated where you're going to go out with your friends, making decisions around your friends and family. They're all things we negotiate all the time. Look for those opportunities. See where your natural skill is. You don't have to compromise your ethics to get what you want through negotiation, right? You don't have to cross your values. Don't necessarily have to have the upper hand. Some of the best negotiation I've ever been involved in is where the other person felt they had the upper hand. I just felt maybe I knew where we were going and had the steering wheel a little bit. It's not always formal. Sometimes it's informal, right? So we got to see the difference there. There are no rules, right? In different parts of the world, negotiate in very different ways based off culture. Virtually, this is so critical. And I'd write virtually everything is that is the product of negotiation is negotiable. One of our clients last week, we were talking about renewing deals, and we had to go back to every single deal and see in the past what sins we had in the past, where we gave ground up, because that's the exact spot where they're going to start negotiating with us, right? So if the deal is a product of negotiation, it will be negotiated. Always expect others to ask for a better deal. I'm so surprised sometimes when salespeople and business people are surprised when somebody's asking for a better deal, right? There is a level of skepticism out there, right? Not everybody believes what they read and see. Learn to say no. It's a very short, sometimes you just have to say no. You got to make sure it's good for you and good for them. And salespeople really struggle with this too. Sometimes we have to remind our clients and their salespeople that, they don't necessarily work for the client. They actually work for the logo that's on their card. So, and where you can look for creative solutions to reach an agreement. Last few things to go through. If you're looking for options, how can I persuade? And that's winning through an argument or a process. Get the other person to go first. What are some throw-ins you can put in? And most people that you negotiate with say they have to go talk to other people. So when they use authority, how can you also use authority? You got to pay attention to that stuff. And then don't get sucked into time pressure, and don't overplay the time pressure game. Amazon does that all the time. There's only this many left, buy it now. Airlines do this, so many seats left at this. It's like a Kmart special, right? When to be quiet. A lot of times I'm saying learn to shut up. Sometimes that's good. Learn to say no, learn to shut up. Right? Revert to a contract. Sometimes watch when people delay you with activity. There's a suicide clause there that, sometimes you can delay them with activity also. Know when to walk away. If you can't walk away and read the ultimatum, and are you going to use it? They're all options that are used against us and things that we can use on our own. Remember, sometimes these moves, when you use them back, exit out. Like anytime I've ever bought a business in my life, I was taught by a lawyer a long time ago to somebody put in a contract when I was younger that they were able to buy me out at a certain price and term and things like that. And I was sideways about it. And this old lawyer I knew said, "Hey, Lance, just put that in that you'll be able to also buy him out for the same price under the same circumstances." And once we went back and forth with that, it actually got taken out when I used the same move back. Some very specific tactics, notice some things like when somebody, if you're face to face, for instance, if they display very, very exaggerated physical reaction, sometimes silence is best. When they refer to authority, a higher authority, ask them about that, get them to describe it, the who, what do you think they'll say? How's it going to be scrutinized, right? Do they follow your advice, right? Will you recommend us for the job, right? Make sure if they are saying I have to go back and talk to somebody, you're getting them to be specific. When they try to split the difference, always try to get them to go first. You don't want to be negotiating against yourself, right? Typically, you split the difference of the difference. Right. So if you made an offer, get them to respond. Don't you respond off your first offer. If they withdraw the offer, I tried to get them to go with the change. They said no, they wouldn't even go with the original offer. Remember the power of the word, use exact numbers, carefully check your docs. Minimize the issue, play down the importance. Let's just get clear, even though it makes sense for both of us. If they act pressed for time, move close, never get too boxed in. If they say, if you think it's a done deal, just get it done. Stop talking and close the deal. Obvious stuff that you all know. So now with the last few minutes we have, I have two more major points, right? Are you as you're analyzing and blueprinting, are you in a quick style of negotiation? Right? And sometimes that's effective when time's limited, you're working one-on-one and you have one primary issue. But then sometimes we might have to change and go to a deliberate style when time's not limited. You have multiple meetings and there are multiple issues or variables, right? So you got to go to a more deliberate style. So let's look at that for a second in the process. And we're gonna land the plane here. So we look at inside the negotiation process, a baseline structure would be, what does your prep look like? What's your opening position? Are you dealing with multiple variables or single? What's the bargaining look like? Where do we need movement? And then how do you close? Because remember, we're coming right back down to that sales funnel again. And this is kind of like building a house, if you will, right? So think about it this way. So prep is laying the foundation, right? So let's look at that. Here are some questions you could ask yourselves, and you'll get a copy of this if you can't take notes of it. What are the strengths of both sides? So a good lawyer preps the case they're fighting against. A good lawyer never asks a question they don't answer to. What are the weaknesses of both positions? How can both win? And what are the consequences to both sides? That's some prep, right? What are some must-haves? What would you like to be have, nice to have, and ranking in order, right? Then let's go to the next thing. What's our opening position? So there's much deeper thoughts in this. I'm just kind of grazing the top for somebody to think. What is our opening position, right? And essentially, this is framing the structure. So prep is the house. This is framing the structure, right? Question for information, clarification, what kind of commitment? Confirm all agreements are reached and positions offered. Like that, you got to make sure you know where you are, right? So this is where we are, this is where you are, essentially. Bargaining, right? And bargaining is building the walls, right? This is where you got to challenge the other side to justify theirs, right? If it sometimes steel manning this, it's a concept where you make the other argument and kind of know, you get them to justify your position. So you're saying things like, if I'm going to understand your position, this is where you are, right? Examine and test how committed they are to certain things, and then present the commitments that you're going to make. Movement, right? These are the finishing touches in the house. Be prepared to concede where you're going to need to. Remember, if you give something up and they don't, that is a level of extortion. Begin with those of low priority and seek higher priority items. So get the small stuff out of the way so you can spend time on the bigger stuff. Never concede on more than possible by your own brief. Meaning, like, don't just throw some things in. And a lot of salespeople and a lot of business people do that. And then close, right? I think at the end of the day, as we close, this is probably a good metaphor for the whole thing. And we want to get you guys out of here. So we've got about 5-10 more minutes. Close. There's not a ton of skill in closing. Closing you open the door is pretty simple. Closing is more of an attitude, and just kind of do it. Just ask for the order. What are your thoughts on moving forward? What does this, what time frame can you get this done? Sometimes a closing question could bring more things out or create a ramp to land this thing. Hopefully, we gave you some more insight in negotiation. It's a very deep process. Like Chip mentioned before, and we probably have some questions, we'd be willing to make an investment in your organization to look at one of your better salespeople, or maybe your, even yourself, and give you some predictive analysis and feedback on competencies, a great coaching document, and a good hiring document also, if you wanted to use it. We have a lot of experience in that. So Chip, we probably have some questions. Let's go through that.
Yeah, we sure do. And as I pull these up, I just want to say you're going with me next time I go to a dealership to negotiate my next car deal. So I'm sure everyone feels the same way. First question we have, and please put them in the Q&A. First question is, how can we balance being persistent with being respectful when dealing with objections and hesitant prospects?
Well, I think it depends kind of what you're doing, right? I think if you're looking at objections and you're looking at the being persistent as opposed to professional, I think the professional thing to do is to make sure you understand where you disagree. So you're labeling, you're saying, look, you have a concern about X, Y, and Z. And then you probably come back and you say, look, where do we agree? So you clarify the objection. If they bring up price, let me understand that. When you say price, how do you mean? There's a clarification. And then you got to find points of agreement. Because if they give you an objection, and then you got to create compelling reason to move forward. So you might have to come back and represent certain things for them, and you don't want to show your frustration, and you want to look like you're genuinely interested and you're listening to understand, not just respond. And sometimes you got to tempo it down and not be so quick. I know a lot of people are just so fast in their feet. And just remember something else. The most offensive question you could probably ask anybody, and I have no clue why, is the question why? Why? It just seems to piss people off. We're not sure why, but it does. So I would answer that way. Thanks, Chip. What
Yeah.
are some questions?
Yeah, we have time for a couple more. One of the next questions is, what are the key techniques for identifying and addressing hidden objections early on in the negotiation process?
Yeah, well, and I would put that kind of in the objection process. So if somebody brought up price, so say Chip said, I'm really concerned. Say I asked Chip a closing question. Chip, what are your thoughts on moving forward? He said, well, I have some concerns about the price, and I might say something. Chip, help me understand price. You define price as what? How do you understand it? And then I might say, Chip, is it more price or more value? And I try to get him to clarify because some people use those words interchangeably. And then say he comes back and says, well, look, it's actually our budget. Okay, so it's not as much price as your budget. That's right. And then I would probably say off of that, in addition to the budget, what other concerns do you have? And I wouldn't even go anywhere else until I ask the addition question. I am telling you that's your biggest moneymaker. The more you can ask after you identify the first objection, and even you could use that in the negotiation process too, if you're in a bargaining spot and some other stuff comes up. What you don't want to play is whack-a-mole, where you deal with one or start to resolve one objection, or you start to bargain and you're dealing with one thing and another one pops up. So you got to kind of lock it down, right? Day type compartment. So lock one, move. So good question. Any others?
One more question, and then we can wrap this up. How can sales leaders coach their teams to remain confident and assertive when facing tough negotiations?
I think the biggest thing as a leader is I'm number one, confidence comes from when things aren't assumed. So I would almost make it a KPI, sales leaders, that an objection stated is what you want, an objection assumed isn't. I don't care how seasoned the salespeople are. So I'm always asking in our sales meetings, and Gina, our VP of sales, asks us all the time, what is the objection? What did they say it was? What did they write it? And then when you're dealing with something you can see, it's easier to coach and gives confidence. What doesn't give confidence at all is literally when a salesperson is making a guess, right? And then they're trying to cover too much field. So I would literally start there and then blueprint all the possible objections. My salesperson, John, and I, when we were up at Muskegon, a big contract we were negotiating last Wednesday night, we just met for beers and over some burgers and beers in Muskegon. We literally listed out every possible crazy objection they could give us. I would tell you we were both pretty calm, right? Because they had one request for something we didn't think of, but I don't even think it was an objection, it was a clarification. So I think that's the other thing. You prepare for the craziest things. It's almost like a creative session you would have, and that also provides for creative solutions. So
For sure. Well, we have one more question that is pretty interesting, so let's get to this quickly. Sales landscape in 2024 is the year of the procrastinator. What do you recommend for the procrastination objection?
Well, so first of all, I don't know who said that, but I would actually say procrastination is an inherent objection that is part of every single sales process, no matter what. I mean, if your last two inherent objections are procrastination and indecision. So part of your sales process should deal with procrastination. So we should go in and expect that people are going to say, hey, let me think about it. I was coaching, if any of my customers are on here, they hear me say this all the time. When you ask somebody what their thoughts are, most people will tell you, great presentation. Thank you for your time. This was awesome. That is the kiss of death. So if I'm actually dealing with that, if I was being specific, I'm not even saying that's the one. I would actually ask them, I would be ready to go. So what did you not like about what we presented? What did you hate about what we presented? What would make you uncomfortable? And then, well, what do you think your folks are going to say when what are you going to, other decision makers are going to say? And then I would try to remove it. If you weren't waiting and seeing right now, if time, because procrastination is about timing to get to it. So if it wasn't the timing we're in, let's just isolate down on what we presented you. So timing wasn't bad. Would you do it? And I would try to remove that at all times and attack it. But I would anticipate that people are going to say, wait and see, right? And be ready to remove the objection. And obviously, sometimes when I answer these questions, I'm talking in a very general way because I'm trying to put myself in your shoes. And look, if you have a very specific question and you're on this webinar and you just want to hit me up on LinkedIn and ask me a very specific question, look, you spend time with me, I'll spend time with you and get you an answer. It's my commitment.
Excellent. Yeah, very good. Well, that will, I guess, wrap us up for this part 2 of this webinar. Remember, all registrants will receive access to the recording of this webinar in the next few days. So be on the lookout for your email. And then again, and for the sales leaders attending this webinar, we will invest in your team by providing a comprehensive assessment for predictive insights into one sales team member, competencies for negotiations and objections. So please reach out to me via email to take advantage of this offer. So thanks for everyone for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Thanks, Chip. Thanks all.